Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage Errant, Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells. In these chapters, we finally get the confrontation between Hugh and Co. and Alustin, and it really does not go the way I expected at all. Doesn't go the way any of them seems to have expected either. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. So, first of all, I know that our friends are out looking for him. I am aware that the goal of Hugh and Co. at the moment is to find Alustin. But I will freely admit, I didn't think they were going to find him yet. I fully expected that these chapters would be them getting into fights with, sort of intermediaries, other people before they finally discover Alustin surprisingly hiding in some place, and maybe we'd get one or two encounters with maybe with some of his doppelgangers that he made, something like that. So when they swoop into this warehouse and they find him in the midst of all of the paper fluttering around, I fully thought, okay, this is a doppelganger. I didn't expect it to be him. And there was even a moment or two as things are shaking out and they're talking that I was still sort of wondering, is this really him though? Or is he just distracting them and, doing whatever he needs to do to keep their attention focused? But it seems indeed it was him. And there is something kind of delightful about the fact that we wasted no time and we just got here. Obviously, things are going a different way, and I still don't know how this is going to end. But I am also really interested in his argument about why the Tongue Eater isn't going to spread the way that Candoron thinks it will spread. I cannot tell how much what he thinks is based in reality and just wishful thinking, because I don't really understand the magical physics behind the effects that he's talking about. So I'm going to read verbatim what he says once we get there, but obviously a girl has to back up and start at chapter 35. Hard to digest. The first sign that a great power was approaching them was when Hugh's crown nodes began to vibrate as though they were entering a massive density of wards. And, I said I thought there would be others to be. I guess we technically do get this one, but you know what I mean. I just kind of, Emic Shard says mini bosses before the main boss. I think I was sort of thinking something like that, or, we have an obstacle course set up before you finally face your big bad. So this is so wild. Dozens of bamboo spears. Within seconds, they found themselves in the midst of a vast bamboo framework, one that stretched for multiple blocks in either direction, towering over the tenements of the neighborhood they were in. Soon after that, the bamboo framework fully rolled over them, and they lost all sight of the outside world past the intersecting thickets of lashed bamboo poles. The bamboo strikes kept coming, but Hugh's attention was fixed on the wards, of which there were hundreds, built into the very structure of the massive bamboo frame. The whole constantly shifting structure almost resembled a labyrinth of defenses. Mackerel seemed even more fascinated by the framework than Hugh was. And they're launching, trying to break it. It's not working. The wards are quite effective. There's a few that break, but it's not enough to really accomplish anything to get them out of this. Havath really weaponized a mage circus? Perhaps they circusized a weapon, a voice called from the heights above them. Or maybe a circus weaponized Havath, another voice called. Or a weapon Havath to circus, yet another called. Clowns, Talia muttered. We were told of you, warned of your strategies, told not to negotiate or seek your surrender. But it's no fun to go for the kill directly. So we'll give you a chance. Escape our little maze, and we'll let you live for now. Sabe shook her head. Count me a little skeptical on that part. It's not as if you have a choice. Ask your two digging friends. So, I am so confused about this. You guys, this is a bamboo framework imbued with wards, which is controlled by acrobats and is in and of itself a great power. Are the acrobats that are managing it great powers also? Or is it simply the structure they've built that is a great power? Genuinely, not completely following this, because they continue to call the framework a great power, almost as if it's a sentient thing. And there's no indication to me that it is, but the people are never called great powers. So I don't understand how this works. So at first they're like, okay, well, Mackerel's gonna find our way out of this, because it's basically like a maze. And then Godric suggests something. They all smile at his plan, even Sabe, who would be especially useful, then immediately put it into action and gave Mackerel the order to start. Dan says, I think the construct as a whole is the great power. It's like Katamari in real life. So the people aren't then. So is it sort of that anybody could control it? Or are these people bound to it in a particular way that causes it to be a great power? I have a thing that I'm going to read a little bit later that will sort of, point out another bit of my confusion. So they all smiled at his plan. He immediately flew up into one side. Hugh carried them after, not by levitation, but by climbing, protruding crown nodes to make crude pyramidal limbs all around their enclosure, pushing them through gaps in the bamboo frame. And as he's pushing them through, these people are discussing how much they obviously do not appreciate their own advantages, and how this crew really thinks highly of themselves and doesn't want to admit that they have been very lucky in whose eye they've caught, the resources they've been granted, etc., etc. And there's a point at which they say, with that kind of investment, anyone would have been successful. And it's very obvious that they want to needle them by implying that, you aren't cool. You're not even that good at what you do. It's just the shit you've been given, which is true in some ways, And Sabe, who is born to a great family, so I really appreciated that she's the one to say this. She chimes in unexpectedly and is like, you're right. We have succeeded thanks to our connections. And there's this long pause and they say, well, and she says, well, what? Well, usually that sort of response is followed by some claim that you've done more with your advantages than others could have. Or that you've pushed above and past the advantages you were given. Or that you were given those resources because you were better suited to using them than others. And it's really I actually really enjoyed this bit because Sabe does not try to qualify at all that they are everybody's a victim of circumstance as much as they are. And it's the kind of thing that I really appreciate this author, like, leaning into here beyond just the theme, which I appreciate, of everybody deserves a chance. And if we gave everyone a chance, imagine what we could actually accomplish. But there's the additional theme of most YA books pointing out how a particular being, a person who's like usually our main character, has an unusual skill that nobody else has, which will cause them to like rocket past their peers. And, you know, it'll often be manifest as like, oh, you're the chosen one kind of thing, depending on how it is. I feel like Harry Potter tried to sidestep that by having Harry not be great at school and have it be that, like, Voldemort singled him out when he was an infant, so it wasn't like he chose to be anything, and it wasn't like he was born inherently with, like, a gift. So she tries to sort of undermine that, especially by having the possibility that, like, Neville could have been in the same position as Harry, and it sort of was actually up to Voldemort. But nevertheless, that is just such a trope in YA, which is part of why I sort of enjoy the Hunger Games, where it feels like Katniss doesn't want any of this and actively isn't the person that they would work with if they could choose, but it just happened to be her that was like in the spotlight. So this, for this author to just be like, these kids aren't just gifted beyond the imaginings of mortals. They are, you know, unnaturally lucky. Let's be honest. Like, they have met so many great powers. Sabe's grandmother has, like, helped them out a lot. Hugh accidentally wound up in the situation he did in the labyrinth, where he wound up pacted to Canderon, and who knows what would have happened to Hugh if that hadn't happened. And just all of this, she fully is like, yeah, if anything, how far Hugh has come, having been somebody who had no idea how to use his magic, from like a completely manaless area of our world where they shun mages. Like, he is a perfect example of how somebody who shouldn't have been successful can be, even despite all that's against him, as long as he's given the tools that he needs. And they don't really know what to say to this, which I did find enjoyable. And you make insulting you boring, Flea. You're ugly and stupid and smell like cheese. Oh, God. So the next few minutes, they dart through the bamboo maze, and they're, you know, getting through it. And then it says the trap sprung. They could see the communal bamboo great power engaging in a 3-way battle with Alustin and some unknown fiber mage great power. So this is when we have, like, the thing that I had mentioned in the last episode of sort of jumping from one POV to another and seeing a moment in the battle that is mentioned by one character. We jump into a different perspective a little later, and we get to see it from theirs. They could see other great powers in the distance tearing up the city. And then a perfectly interlocked cage of wards sprung into place around them, so densely woven that the crown wards began to visibly fuzz and fray. We don't appreciate you cheating, using your little book to navigate. And Sabe said, we absolutely expected cheating from you, so we came prepared. And she uses a lightning bolt. And it says it began chanting through the galvanic anchors she had placed all through the maze. A few arced at random, but the vast majority were focused on the defenses around the outside of the frame or around Hugh and his friends. They raced between the bamboo poles, igniting them or even exploding them. At least one acrobat mage was struck and lost his grip, bouncing off every intervening bamboo pole on his way down. Only a fraction of the bamboo's maze was affected, but threw the rest of the maze into immediate chaos. Lightning bolts spat by Alustin, and cable lashes from the fiber mage began to breach the outer defenses of the maze. And you're thinking, okay, that's it. And then it goes, they weren't even close to done, though. And the street explodes. There was like a pipe that had alchemical like supply lines underneath the street, and they bust that open. The entire bamboo framework reacted violently, yanking itself away at high speed. So this is the thing that I was confused by, because the way it says yanking itself away makes it seem like it is conscious. And I can't tell, is it supposed to be like it yanks itself away because the wards are programmed basically to like avoid a certain type of damage, and it's just almost like a robotic response? Or is it alive? Do you know what I'm saying? Emic Shard says communal power, team of bamboo mages operating it. The device in collaboration lets the clowns operate as a great power, like the glass hall in Siege of Skyhold, or clan casters making massive fire spells together. Interesting. Dan says it's like a bamboo mech with clowns as pilots who have the affinities needed to run it. Okay. You guys, I'm going to need to stop for a second, because you guys both are saying it lets the clowns operate it. And I really did not think we were talking about actual clowns. I thought we were talking about, oh, what a bunch of clowns. Are you telling me these are clowns doing this? Because I was not getting that at all. Hold on. I'm backing up. No, there's nothing about the look of them. It's just so they're just, okay. So they're circus acrobat, because you guys, like, you know, you say clowns like real clowns, and I'm picturing clowns like the way that you're saying this. And now that's just in my head. Oh man. I kind of want that to be the thing. Like, I know it doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. This isn't One Piece. You know what I'm saying? But my goodness. Okay. So, let's see. They talk about how these idiots like keep on talking and monologuing and then not wanting to strike us because we're young. And Godric is like, yeah, don't you think it's kind of fucked up that they have enough ethics they feel uncomfortable killing teenagers, and the fact that they have ethics is like a real weak spot that we can exploit, and everybody's sort of like, yeah, we're not going to talk about that. So then, 5 minutes of sprinting later, Mackerel veered to one side and rammed through the window of a warehouse Hugh hadn't even noticed. A attention ward, which I really like it anytime we're on the other side of an attention ward and we get to see how effective they are. Because there is like every reason to think that an attention ward would work even better during a battle like this, when everybody has a million things that they need to be keeping track of. There's things blowing up all over the place. You know, this would be the ideal time to put something like that into action, where everything is just kind of frantic in every direction. So they bust through the wall, and there are like sheets of paper flying everywhere. Hugh released his first starfire bolt before their former teacher had even finished turning their way. And again, I fully thought this was going to be a doppelganger. I don't know why I didn't think that Mackerel would be able to like see through that, but I just thought, I just did, just because that's how stories tend to go. Do you know what I'm saying? So anyway, the thing that killed me, though, is that Alustin has the exact setup ready with his paper to basically like smother all of their armor and make it all either go down completely or prove like ineffective for movement or whatever. And that shit wasn't what they all thought they were getting into. Like, it's clearly caught them off guard how much he gets them seized up completely right away. No, Alustin said. No, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be hundreds of leagues away. And I really was surprised that he thought that. Has he ever thought that, like, when we were in his head? I thought he knew they were going to be facing off with him. Did he just think that, like, they wouldn't find him? Like, he had to know they were going to be part of this battle, right? Did he not realize that? Like, what did he think they were doing this whole time? I don't know. I guess I just also thought that the, like, spies and stuff that he had set up would have let him know. So, yeah, the paper wraps around them, and then he yells, I trained all of you. I know what y'all can do. You gotta stop fighting and just leave and get the fuck out of here. And they just sort of glare at each other, and Hugh is like, he doesn't seem to want to hurt us. Why are you even here? Do you want vengeance for Candoron that badly? Hugh laughed. We're not as stupid and immature as you are, sir. We're not out for vengeance, and you know perfectly well we can't move fast enough to get 100 leagues away in time. Don't call me sir. Why do you hate being called sir? I've always wondered. If you're not here for vengeance, why are you here? Obviously not to help me. We might have, if you'd come to us rather than betraying Candoron and hurting Hugh. You turned us into weapons and then you just threw us away. You're not weapons, Alustin snapped. You're children. Children you taught to kill, Sabé said. We're here to stop you from potentially destroying the continent with the Tongue Eater. How do you know about that? Because we spoke to Candoron, Sabé said. She told us what you were planning, told us that shattering the Tongue Eater posed a risk of destroying the continent. Alustin groaned. You've thrown your lives away for nothing. The Tongue Eater won't destroy the continent. The escaped languages won't even travel far past the borders of the Dominion. Candoron seemed very certain there was a risk, Hugh said. Are you going to take the word of a dying phoenix over mine? I doubt Candoron could even think straight at that point. I promise you there's no risk. There's an upper limit to the propagation radius of any spell, no matter how powerful. You might think I'm a madman, but never accuse me of not doing the math. You're talking about alien magic, Godric demanded. How do you know different rules don't apply? It's not a property of the magic. It's a property of Anastas ether. The Tongue Eater is hardly the only destructive alien weapon to appear on Anastas. What about the exile splinter? Talia said. That affected the entire world when it erased the memory of Imperial Ithos. And the Tongue Eater itself did the same when it ate languages, Sabé added. Neither of those were destructive releases, Alustin snapped. They didn't send out the kind of shockwaves through the ether that destroying the Tongue Eater will, so they didn't receive the same resistance. Now, though I usually encourage questions, I have no time for yours. You'll have to just trust that I know more than you. After all, I've literally been a mage since before any of you were born. And I really, really don't know what to think about this. I genuinely don't. He seems so confident. And the only thing I can think is that maybe there have been some alterations made to the Tongue Eater since it was taken into custody by Candoron that make it, like, more volatile than he realizes, or that he simply has bad information on how it functions, or that he is in denial because he wants to do what he wants to do, and he doesn't really have the full, like, capacity to let himself look with, like, honesty at what it is that he is about to do to everyone. Like, I can't tell if this info is coming from a place of, like, psychological, you know, what's the word I want? Rationalization? Or if he really has done the math and really believes what he's saying? or it doesn't feel like he's lying to them. It really doesn't have the energy of somebody who's just like making up excuses. It feels like he really is confident. And the way that it affected the entire world when it erased the memory, and the tongue eater itself did the same when it ate languages. And he says neither of those were destructive releases. They didn't send out the kind of shockwaves through the ether that destroying the tongue eater will. So I think that my issue was that he was going to be using the tongue eater to eat languages. Like it was going to be the thing that drove people to madness. But what he is intending to do is destroy it and use it like a bomb. And that was when Kandaron was like, oh, I was wondering how he planned to destroy it. It was the chitin wand. I think that I was under the impression that destroying it was what you did to kind of activate it, which I know doesn't really like make sense, but I thought it would like essentially you destroy the vessel and then you can do something to create a new vessel with similar properties once it has been destroyed and released, like the energy remains in the air. Do you know what I'm saying? I think I just really misunderstood what it was he was planning on doing here. And just setting off a bomb like is what it sounds like, which is much more direct an attack than I was imagining. I thought it was going to be a much more insidious, slow burn kind of thing. And that, you know, everybody who died, it was going to be sort of a descent into madness once they lost language. And I'm only just really understanding that that's not the plan at all. He's not just going to unleash it. It's just a power source and that's it. So Dan says he definitely believes what he's saying. MX Shard says he's planning to destroy it and release the languages in it, damaging the minds of everyone in the radius. He's convinced it will only go so far, but Kandaron thinks it will cascade out further and cause more problems. Okay, so this does sound like, you know, him saying like, oh, she didn't even know what she was saying. I mean, sir, she's not like... It's just funny because he really seems to have an idea of what he's operating throughout this conversation. It's not until later that he begins to realize that Kandaron probably isn't dead. But in this conversation, he is assuming that she was gasping out her last and her body was like almost done. And whatever she said is totally unreliable. And he doesn't realize how completely like lucid and with it she was right up until the last seconds. So... yeah, I know that it's crazy, Alustin, but when you say, like, you're going to trust a dying phoenix instead of me, I'm going to trust a, like, hundreds of years old, almost immortal being over you. Yes. I mean, just saying you're going to take her word over mine when you have proven to be a lying liar who betrays. Well, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't we just, like, take her word over yours, sir? It's really funny. It's funny. So anyway, then he says that, like, Talia, he zeroes in on her and says, you're not a weapon. You're deadly, but you're a person. And he says, you know how you can trust me? I threw you away when you were all I needed. What are you talking about? Have you ever wondered why I kept you so far away from other bone mages? You said they wouldn't be able to help me, that all their magic was focused on self-modification, that trying that would kill me. What's the first rule of bone magic? It's most effective on your own bones, but I never told you how big the explosion would be if you used your own magic on your own bones. I let you assume it would be its normal size for that much bone. Didn't I? It won't be. It can't be that much of a difference. The effect isn't that significant, is it? Do you remember what happened when you destroyed the herdsman's palace? The explosion just kept going, Hugh found himself answering. The fragments kept growing and detonating again and again, way past normal. Observant at all, as always, Hugh, full marks. But, Talia said again, if you were to ignite your own skeleton, Talia, the explosion on its own would be comparable by itself to the explosion that took out the herdsman's palace. But the chain reaction that would follow, it wouldn't stop as fast as the ones at Dragonclaw Yardang. It would keep going for hours. Talia, you would be enough on your own to level Havath City. You would be enough to level a city 10 times its size. You have more destructive power than half the items in Skyhold's vault. You've been a great power since the very instant you discovered Bonefire. That's how you know I'm telling the truth. If I saw you as a weapon, it would have been so easy to manipulate you into hating Havath. I could have let your friends die in battle against the Dominion. I could have manipulated you and your clan into the conflict. It would not have been hard. And you would have fallen so easily into the same role I have. Stories have so much power over you. And you know how easily the role of vengeful madwoman would have fit you. And I was just standing here like, yikes. Because he's describing the way that any terrorist organization radicalizes youth. You find somebody with a capacity for destruction, with an edge to them that's like a little bit manic, and then you feed them information, and you manipulate their perception, and, you know, restrict what they have access to so that they only hear the story you want them to hear. And then you convince them that what they're doing is somehow like a higher, nobler cause, and just send them on their way to do their thing. So at first, when he's talking about like exploding her skeleton, I'm going, wait, but wouldn't that kill her? How could you have used her then? She'd have to do it to herself. Why would she do that? And then when he starts describing the ways in which he could have manipulated her, I was like, oh, he really could have made her do it. Like, I mean, as somebody who myself can be too much of an all or nothing person, and also I do have, like, stories do have influence over me. I can be very similar to Talia in this respect. And it's something that I've noticed that I think is something that points a lot to, like, when you're neurodivergent, is you learn how to relate to the world through media rather than like seeing things as they are. So this can turn into over-reliance on like references and quoting instead of real communication. And it's part of why I think I have this like really perfectionist streak in terms of aesthetic, because I grew up watching films that had a certain like look to parties and a look to main characters and their wardrobes and stuff. And so I internalized that a lot. And the idea of like feeding me info and then letting me loose when I have lost people, and you convince me that it's like this one particular group of people's fault that I did, I really could see myself falling for this quite easily. Like, this is not a nice thing to see about yourself. But I think it's important that we all be honest about how we have our weak points in terms of our critical thinking. It's not something that you can't flatter yourself that you're like the lone exception who would see the truth behind the lies. When people are in these sorts of situations and get manipulated to believe this stuff, it's not that they're stupid people. It's they were preyed upon by somebody who knows exactly how to handle folks who have specific trauma. And they weaponize that trauma, and it's no different than any other kind of predation. It's just got a different ultimate goal. But in the end, it's about control, which is what most predation is ultimately about. And you just got to be real with yourself sometimes and see that there were points in your life where you fully believed some of the bullshit you were being fed. And maybe you've grown and learned better, but there is still 10 years from today going to be shit that you look back and realize you believed today and you're ashamed of because you're like, I can't believe I fell for that. It's just reality, man. So this whole thing, it just made me real creeped out. And like the fact that Alustin had this plan and it was like, he couldn't go through with it, but he still had it fully formed in his head. I know that he basically wants cookies for not utilizing her that way, but I can't help but be like, I'm sorry, sir. I don't know how to tell you this, but, and Alustin says, Godric, I'm sorry for your father. He was a good man. Sabe, I'm sorry for letting you down, even after you gave me another chance. Hugh, I'm sorry for hurting you, for betraying your trust, for taking another loved one from you. Please try and get as far away as you can. I know the odds are bad, but you've all surprised me before. If you can get outside the Tongue Eater's blast radius, you'll be fine. Ilinia might be able to take you far enough. And Sabe says, now. And I loved this. Even in the midst of all of them being surprised, taken off guard by the extent of like the direction his plans could have gone, his apologies, they are still locked and loaded and ready to go. And they do not lose focus. So when she says now, they just go. Like, it's not even a question of, well, maybe we should rethink this. Nope. They are focused and they're going to do what they do. And that there is nothing about what he has said has convinced them that he shouldn't be killed. They're not fools, you know? They are going to like internalize what he has said, and it's definitely going to be something they all think about, but in the end, it doesn't fucking matter. So they attack, and there is a long description here, and I will say this, you know, I have been like a little bit frustrated with the ways in which Bierce has like jumped into the middle of a scene and then tried to sort of come out of it and explain what's happening to us in a way that can sort of slow down the ultimate, like the momentum that we have built up to this point. But I actually really liked the way this was done here because all of them have developed abilities that we haven't gotten to see yet as readers. So there's a lot of wild shit happening. Hugh uses a steel spike and just projectile shoots it towards Alustin. Godric is, using siege magic, and he's using this like starbolt, and he can make a bigger one than Hugh even at this point. But of course, Alustin's got his far seeing, so even when he has his back to them, he can fully see what they're doing, and he's able to redirect both of their attacks, which they pretty much thought he would. And then we have Talia, who's got this windshield that keeps growing and growing. The windshield kept growing in a dome that was rapidly filling the warehouse, and as it did so, the winds within heated up faster and faster. By the time Alustin blocked Godric's starbolt, Talia's windshield was already hot enough that it was burning away half of Alustin's paper in the warehouse, including the sheets suppressing their various armor and powers. Alustin's armor by itself resisted the burning winds, but within heartbeats, Alustin's complete control over the inside of the warehouse was gone. And then we find out about Sabe's Starstrike armor, which is really, really wild. So what we have here is a combination of starfire and lightning. And because they are like sort of related, they figure out a way that she can manage to form it into armor. But it can only be sustained for like several seconds. That's it. She could do a lot within those few seconds, though. So when it spins around her body, this armor creates a really, really powerful galvanic field. Multiple fields. If they'd been iterating this new magic on a less metal-poor world than Limnus, Sabe would likely have killed herself, impaling herself with countless nails and iron scraps. As it was, the single one of Godric's steel nails that had struck her shoulder stretched her healing affinity to its limits. So, they'd begun adding steel mana to the mix. They never found a way to repress the galvanic field entirely, but they found the next best thing, a way to make sure the iron and steel chunks attracted flew into orbit around her rather than striking her, which served as both additional defense and offense, especially as the extreme heat of the starfire melted the metal. It also added a bit of mobility. Sabe could push off the little bits of metal, slamming them against walls or floors with arcs of lightning, pushing herself weakly in the opposite direction. She couldn't wield her shield and spear while using the Starstrike armor, in part because of the galvanic field, but also due to the risk of simply melting them. And she then adds wind armor, like directly underneath, to keep her from overheating. Starstrike armor was, quite likely, the single strangest use of their pooled affinities they discovered so far. They were fairly sure that the bizarre emergent reactions they discovered in the creation process were just the tip of the iceberg. It took no less than 4 different affinities to function, and drained 3 of them incredibly swiftly. Only Sabe's wind affinity could stand up to the mana use for longer than a few seconds. A few seconds was all Sabe needed, though. And this is so wild. So he has the sword echoes in front of him to defend him, and she's able to get through those with barely slowing down. Talia kept raising the temperature to the point abandoned wood crates were bursting into flame. Alustin desperately dodged and fled from Sabe, entirely unable to go toe-to-toe with her Starstrike armor. Mackerel, freed of his geometric prison, helped corral Alustin, cutting off his avenues of escape one by one. Then the entirely unexpected happened. Sabe found herself launching straight at Alustin, his helicotin saber yanked harshly to one side, completely unable to stop her. Found her starfire, lightning, and molten metal-coated fist descending straight towards Alustin's chest. Found that Alustin wore a look of complete confusion and shock on his face. And then found herself thrown back by an explosion from above as the roof tore itself open. Found her Starstrike armor collapsing as her stellar mana ran out, and found herself only protected by her wind armor and the molten metal carried by her iron and steel affinities. And found herself staring up through the hole in the roof at Valia Warwell and the assembled might of the Sacred Swordsman. I was so mad, you guys. I was so mad. Look, ultimately, I'm going to be honest. I don't actually really want them to kill Alustin. I want Alustin to die. Asterisk. I don't want them to be the ones that do it. I know that's stupid. I am not pretending that I have a noble reason for this. I just hate it for them. And I just don't want them to have to. So, all that in mind, it looked like it was going to happen, and while I didn't really want it, I was like, all right, well, I guess it's happening. What can you do? You can't always get what you want. But to be almost able to do it and then interrupted by fucking Valia of all people, I just found myself so fucking annoyed. Just this bitch is always out here getting in the way of shit. I really like Valia in a lot of ways. I really do. But man, she knows how to ruin shit. She is, ugh. So then we get the fun thing, which is going into Alustin's head in the midst of all of this. And we get to see that he has no goddamn clue what's going on. Eventually, he begins to fucking put it together. But it takes a minute. So it was mind-boggling that Hugh had even kept his affinities with Kandaron's death. They hadn't been pacted nearly long enough for that. Maybe Alustin's tack on Hugh's bond had somehow congealed fully, And then he's watching Sabe come to kill him, and he's just like, well, you know what? All right, I guess I'm going to die either way. And things have come too far. I'm not, them killing me isn't going to stop what's going to happen. It's all over, no matter what goes on in this warehouse. So fine, kill me. there was a part of him that was oddly proud that it would be one of his own students to slay him. And I was just like, God damn it. He can't. His ego, man, it's a force of nature. And then here's Valia. And they are going for it. This is a real fight. And Sabe has been pulled out of the mix for a second. And I love this. Godric summons, it says, a couple dozen enchanted weapons from his storage tattoo. Now, I do not recall. I know that Godric was talking with Eden Slain about how to get spell forms set up. But I don't think that we saw how many weapons he was like figuring out how to use here. Excuse me. The pattern they flew in was recognizably one of Eden Slain's mathematical swarm spell forms, which were perfect for Godric's larger than normal mind's eye. More, some of them had strange effects that he'd never seen before, especially the axe that glowed green and seemed to dissolve everything in its path. And though he was proud of Godric for their clever use and impressed by their strange effects as the weapons began to launch themselves at the swordsman, it was their sheer number that fascinated him. That many enchantments should have unquestionably gone unstable in the close proximity of Godric's storage tattoo, should have damaged one another or even triggered a resonance cascade. They all appeared to be in perfect condition, however. So Alustin, in the midst of this fight, he is using these mind shards, and he cannot help but be curious what his students have been up to and try and figure it out. And there is something about this that I just love, that like, even with them trying to kill him, he's much less concerned about his potential imminent demise than he is with just understanding what they've accomplished and how they can do things that look like they should be impossible. And I can really understand that. And then he sees Sabe, that her armor is filled with rocks, and then he realizes, no, it's crystals. And this sword comes out, the nameless sword that's supposed to be able to cut through almost anything. And she yanks out a wooden staff, and he's fully like, oh, girl, this is about to go bad for you. And it doesn't. She stops the sword, and it gets a tiny nick like somebody pressed their fingernail into it, and that's it. As the staff hit, its end lit with carved spell forms, and lightning raced out of the staff's end to strike him. Not just to strike him, to anchor him, to yank him back to Sabe, who struck him with the staff once more, sending him flying again. Alustin's mind shard immediately recognized the spell forms as planar affinity designs, but Hugh must have somehow figured out a way to use planar spell forms to let Sabe use her magic farther away from her body. Alustin suspected that Sabe's staff required physical contact to work, but even a few extra feet of reach entirely altered Sabe's capabilities. If only he had the slightest clue what sort of wood the staff was made from. Which, that's definitely from fucking, where do you call it, right? One of the weapons that, when Hugh offered one to the Frost Ghost. So then he goes to Talia, who... She has the burning wind and has filled it with dream wasps. Even as he watched, Talia launched a razor-sharp bonefire saw blade at a helpless sacred swordsman with the War Star, a terribly named Morning Star, which added bursts of force to its wielder's blows and mimicked armor with carefully applied force vectors. The carefully applied force vectors were entirely insufficient at stopping the bonefire saw blade, and to Alustin's amusement, quite a few bonefire shards flew back into and got caught up in Talia's burning windstorm, making it even deadlier. And then he goes and sees Hugh, and he's like, he's using water. Wait, how is he drowning a swordsman with water? This doesn't make any sense. And then he just starts laughing, and Valia is like, what the fuck? What are you laughing at, you douchebag? And he's like, oh my god, I think my students warlock packed into one another. And he just yells out, Hugh, Did you guys warlock back to each other? I'm sorry, but God, the idea that he's like fighting Valia, but he still has the attention to like yell this to Hugh, and the fact that if I were Valia and he's fighting me and he's not even fully focusing, I would be so insulted, you know? Like, it would just feel really like he's not taking me seriously. And then this killed me. You used the weapons of last resort? How do you even know about those? And he says you really do see your warlocks as disposable. And like, we know Valia doesn't like this. She didn't want to do this. These warlocks were eager to jump forward and take these weapons knowing they would kill them. They went for it. Valia wasn't, if she had had her choice to like how to handle this, she would not have done things this way. But she genuinely feels like there's no other option right now. And considering the way that Alustin has like treated everybody he's allied with, him talking about her seeing people as disposable is beyond the pale. Like, the absolute fucking gall to act as if he has the moral high ground with her is unreal. I can't believe he even said the words out loud. Like, are you serious right now? You're really in the midst of this, ready to kill everybody in this radius, even people who they think they're on your side, and you're whining about the weapons of last resort. Are you fucking hearing yourself? Oh my God. Valia doesn't rationalize to her herself what she's doing the way that Alustin does either. She fully admits, like, I don't like this. I'm doing it because these are orders, and we are at a point where, like, if we don't pull out all the stops, we're all gonna die. But Alustin is straight up doing this for vengeance. It's not even about a, like, survival thing. I swear to God, he is such a piece of shit. Ugh, he gets me so mad. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat because there was a bunch going on that I missed here. Oh yeah, Megashard says just the thought process of how to manipulate her was genuinely unnerving. Dan says it's a little like Batman having contingency plans to kill the rest of the Justice League. He would, wouldn't he? Ugh, Batman. I find him so tiresome sometimes. Siege magic is very simple but very good at what it does, and I absolutely love the Star Strike armor. It's so cool. She almost killed him here, and none of them know how to process that. Sky Spear wood from Limnus. That's the one. Thank you. Dan says Alustin is so good. MX Shard says he figures it out and is delighted by it so quickly. And then pure hypocrisy as psychological warfare. I guess it is, because it's very easy to sort of get under her skin. Like, because Valia is so empathetic in some ways and so sensitive, it's really, she's kind of an easy mark in ways that I'm not saying that disrespectfully. I am also this way, you know what I mean? So by the time Valia reached him, he wasn't alone. There were 4 perfect copies of Alustin's armor flying in the air beside him. All 5 were identical, each controlled by a single mind shard save in one respect. 4 of them carried the weapons of fallen sacred swordsmen, and 1 of them carried a helicoten saber, and there was no sign of which armor held the real Alustin. I swear to God, you guys. There's a moment here. I'm going to read just this little section as well, because I had to stop and be like, wait, what? And back up. And then I realized one of the new sacred swordsmen lunged at him as he rose out of the warehouse, this one wearing the soldier's crown, which could control 13 enchanted flying swords. Alustin flew straight at him, slapping aside swords with his saber or wrapping their hilts with paper and yanking them off course. A moment later, Alustin had risen to face the oncoming swordsman, a corpse wearing a crown falling behind him. Yikes, that is so bleak. A corpse wearing a crown falling behind him. I mean, that is an intimidating picture. I'm not going to lie. So then, 38. This is the last of the chapters in this section. And we go into Thread Queen Iblint's POV. And we get to see the potential of a fiber mage. And it's really fascinating because, you know, when I hear fiber, I'm thinking fabrics, I'm thinking plants, all of the things that come up initially. But eventually you find out that that includes muscle fiber, which changes everything. And that is so incredibly creepy. I cannot emphasize enough how unnerving I found it. Like, it's hideous. But so she's, you know, she's doing these things called war snarls. And she uses all of this fiber that's like left around the city because there's a ton of abandoned property here, people's clothing and, you know, their bedding and yet whatnot. And the fibers crept through the soil of the city like roots and began drilling into the weak points of the alchemical pipeline. Ropes and threads began creeping about the neighborhoods, slipping out of windows, through drain pipes, then into the next building. The wires of the demesne began to fray, though Iblint had little power over metal compared to most fiber mages, as though in exchange for her greater control over living fibers. All the while, Iblint launched attack after attack on the intertwined avatar, all of which were feints. When she finally launched her true assault, the lich barely had time to react before it died. Threads so thin as to be invisible to the naked eye, held together by little more than magic, sliced through the bronze spell forms carrying mana through the demesne. Ropes sturdier than those on any ship tore demesne enchantments apart, using other parts of the demesne as their pulleys. Great wads of fiber plugged up the pipes carrying toxic alchemical reagents through the demesne, backing up the currents and depriving enchantments of their reagent supply. And most of all, threads with magically enforced ends numbering in the millions pierced the demesne substrate, punching countless tiny holes in the vast swaths of material holding the bulk of the lich's mind. Which is pretty fucking rough, you guys. Also, fiber plugged up the pipes carrying toxic alchemical reagents, depriving enchantments of their reagent supply. I don't know that we have seen any enchantment that needs toxic alchemical backup. Have we seen this in action? Because this is, you know, mentioned here, like I should know what this is. And I'm sure, like, I understand it as a theory, but I'm saying I don't recall anything like this. The thing that I keep thinking of is the way that mana travels in like Skyhold to create the defenses and whatnot. But I don't remember anything like this. And I feel like this is the sort of thing that I would have liked like one or two small examples of before we got here so that I could understand this moment a little bit better. But anyway, so yeah, she kills the lich. And then she notices that there is a dragon who is going down under a force of bamboo. And she's like, oh shit. And she begins to head over there. But then she gets caught up by the fucking phosphorus mage. And she is like, understandably quite sidelined by this. Within moments, flames raced unnaturally fast toward the center of her fiber armor. Iblint didn't hesitate, didn't attempt to fight the flames, just launched herself out of her armor as fast as her fibers could fling her. So she gets out of there. And she gets, like, lands, she's okay, and then she gets hit with something and gets thrown into a wall. And as this happens, she hears Sagravax die and is just like, well, guess that's that. And she stands up and says she found herself facing an unarmed, unnaturally good-looking man of indeterminate age, wearing, of all things, formal evening wear. Enchanted, of course, but still hardly battle-appropriate garb. And I'm just imagining this guy as, like... Imagining, if I'm being real with y'all, most recent James Bond. I can't remember the actor's name, but you know, the blonde. And he says that he has the same affinity. I was born with a human affinity, and I walk the path of heliothrax. And I had this suit woven out of my own hair. Your fiber magic is useless against it. Oh, shut it, Iblin snapped. Unless you're trying to bore me to death, either move out of my way or let's get this over with. As you wish, Apex said. Then they lunged for each other, pushing off the ground so hard each of them left webs of cracks. Thread Queen Iblin's bones had been magically altered far beyond those of other bone mages, far beyond the strength of steel. She had worked strengthening enchantments into them with her own magic, taking them even farther. Her tendons, skin, and countless other body parts had been altered to the limits of what healing-based body modification could do. All of that, however, was just to allow her body to withstand the strength of her own muscles. And we find out just how incredibly strong she is. So when she gets overpowered by this guy, she's just like, wait, what? And he starts to be like, oh God, I really thought this was a much better matched fight. And she says to shut it. And she uses her fiber affinity to affect her vocal cords so that she's shouting. I love him. No need to shout, Apex said disdainfully, warping his own voice similarly. I can control my vocal cords too. Iblin smiled grimly. Can you do this, though? Her limbs began to warp and twist, ripples like waves rushing about underneath her skin. Even as Apex's eyes widened in shock, her very muscle fibers began ripping through her arms, legs, back, and other muscular areas. Before he'd even processed what she'd done, Iblin had raised herself 10 feet into the air on 24 tentacles of exposed muscle, in greater volume than should fit into a human body. At least any human body without a surgically implanted spatial storage space. No, you can't? Well, no worries, I can help you with that. As she lurched toward the human affinity great power, she felt a much warmer sort of satisfaction than she had killing off one of the intertwined. There was a certain joy to beating the crap out of an asshole the old-fashioned way. And the idea that this guy has a human affinity, I don't even know what that just feels unfair. And I don't know if she's got a fiber affinity and she's using it to control her own body and muscles, but he has a human affinity. Can he not control what her muscles are doing as well? Is it just himself that he can control? I don't really get what that does. You know what I'm saying? So if anybody wants to help me out with that, I'm listening. And then we get our last little moment in this chapter where we rejoin Talia's parents again. And they are arguing about whether they are sliding or skating. Graham's fire affinity was a rare form known as combustion, which rather than being a form of heat, was an affinity for the alchemical reaction of flame. It was bizarrely identical to the reaction of the body performed inside itself with the air it breathed. He was able to fuel that reaction with his own magic, letting him run faster and longer than any unmodified human. Hela, meanwhile, was a highly effective oil mage, and she'd long ago mastered creating a layer of oil beneath her feet to skate about at high speeds. Between the two of them, they could move almost as fast as some flyers, and that was before they'd gotten their marriage tattoo, allowing them to use their magic on one another far more easily. Now it was only the fastest flyers that could outrace them. And I love this idea that they get a marriage tattoo that makes them, that's delightful. This is almost like they pacted to each other. They're able to use each other's magic, but they can use it on one another. That's like a step away, you know? And They had no idea what they would find in this lab, but it was certain to be of value to the Hidden Clan in specific and the Mountain Clan in general. And that their speed is why they are approached. And this bit was highlighted by a bunch of people. Rana's praise had been unusually glowing for her. She'd even gone so far as to say that their political machinations were technically, if just barely, passable, and that their subtlety was like half a brick in a sock instead of just the usual Clan Castus brick held directly in hand. His memory of the praise still made him smile when he recalled it. And I was just like, damn, I don't think I realized how much of a hard ass Rana is. So Graham was saved from the need to respond by a building up ahead exploding as it was struck by some unseen smell. The two of them dodged, twirled, and raced through the bouncing boulders, shattered statues, and raining bronze roof tiles, barely making it through intact. I just realized something terrible. You're right. We are sliding, not skating. I was wrong. And as they keep going, she says, well, if you want to call it gliding, we could just do it. And he's like, I'd like that. As chunks of the street reached for them in the form of horse-sized grasping hands, Graham couldn't help but reflect that he had absolutely, unquestionably married the right woman. And that is the end of the chapter. So that's it, kids. But I am real excited. I am just so curious what's going to happen next with Alustin, obviously. I'm very eager to go back to this. So we shall see. But I'm over time by a bit, so I better wrap. Thank you again, Dan, for commissioning this. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.